In a live high-stakes Senate hearing, Caroline Leavitt unleashes a flawless AI-generated video designed to destroy Jasmine Crockett, a deepfake so convincing it shows Jasmine backing 9-month abortions in her own voice and face. For a moment, it seems like Jasmine's reputation is about to be destroyed. But just minutes later, Jasmine strikes back, calmly dropping irrefutable evidence that not only exposes the fake, but ties it directly to Caroline's inner circle. The hearing erupts. The narrative shatters. The predator becomes the exposed. If Congress itself can be hijacked by synthetic lies, what's left to trust when even your outrage is manipulated? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the blinding ceiling lights of room 1100, the chairman raised his gavel. The room froze. Bang! "This hearing will come to order," he announced, voice cutting clean through the chatter. "Today, we will examine the growing impact of artificial intelligence and deepfake technology on the future of American democracy." The words echoed like a warning shot. Every camera locked in. Every phone went live. The stakes had just shifted from legislative to existential. Caroline Leavitt sat on the right side of the hearing table, flanked by Republican aides and framed by sympathetic media. Her posture was impeccable, shoulders back, chin raised, every inch the polished mouthpiece of a government that claimed control over technology meant freedom. She smirked slightly, already rehearsing her talking points. Behind her, conservative outlets whispered anticipation, already scripting her win. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, stone-faced, silent. She didn't look at the cameras, didn't look at Caroline. Her focus was dead ahead. In front of her lay a small silver USB drive, positioned with intention beside a thick folder clamped shut, labeled in plain black font, "Classified Centralogic." No advisors hovered, no allies whispered, just her and the truth she carried like a loaded weapon. The silence around her wasn't weakness, it was precision. The power imbalance was glaring. One woman sat surrounded, armored in narrative and noise. The other sat alone, cornered, quiet, and underestimated. But Jasmine didn't need noise. She had evidence. And as Caroline adjusted her mic with a confident smile, Jasmine's hand shifted an inch closer to the USB. Not to threaten, just to remind. She hadn't come to defend herself. She had come to expose something no one in that room was ready to face. And just as the echo of the gavel vanished into the marble silence of the chamber, Caroline Leavitt leaned forward with calculated poise, her fingers gently tapping the polished wood, her eyes scanning the room like a performer gauging her captive audience. "Before we begin," she said with a practiced breathiness that cloaked cruelty and civility, "I believe we should take a moment to recognize a clip that sparked, let's just say, significant public interest." Her voice curved upward as if teasing a revelation. And at that exact moment, one of her aides, young, stone-faced, earpiece glinting under the lights, hit a key on the laptop beside her. The room dimmed slightly. The central screen behind the chairman flickered, then bloomed into life. And there it was. Jasmine Crockett appeared on screen, sitting against a studio backdrop in muted tones. Her posture familiar, her face unmistakable. The voice, seamless, timbre, cadence, even the rhythm of her breath between sentences. But then came the line, "I support abortion through the 9th month. Sometimes it's the only path to liberation." The words sliced the air like a razor. Audible gasps burst across the hearing room like a chain reaction of disbelief. A woman in the gallery dropped her notepad. One congressman turned in his seat and muttered, "That can't be real." Another from South Dakota wasn't so reserved. He stood halfway and spat, "Unbelievable." Dozens of reporters surged forward instinctively, phones raised, cameras clicking like angry insects. Keyboards lit up in unison, reporters typing furiously as editors shouted through Bluetooth earpieces. On the feed streaming to millions of homes, the caption ran in bold, "Crockett supports full-term abortions?" Caroline reclined ever so slightly, folding her hands in front of her as if she hadn't just fired the opening salvo of a war she'd been planning for weeks. She didn't look at Jasmine. She didn't have to. Her message had landed. In that moment, she wasn't testifying, she was prosecuting, delivering Exhibit A not in a courtroom of facts, but in a theater of perception. And the worst part? No one questioned it. No one asked who produced the clip. No one asked for verification. They just watched. And Jasmine Crockett, still, composed, spine rigid like forged steel, absorbed every gaze like a target on a firing line. She had seen this clip already. She knew the sound design, the frame rate matching, the voice synthesis, AI generated, tailored, malicious. She knew it wasn't real, but the way it was broadcast now, on record before Congress, preserved in the public imagination like a confession, it might as well have been. That was the genius of the weapon. It didn't need to be true. It only needed to feel true. And with every second it played unchecked, with every pair of eyes that refused to blink, a lie calcified into memory. This wasn't just defamation. This was digital crucifixion. And Jasmine hadn't even opened her mouth yet. The clip faded to black, but its shadow clung to the walls of the hearing room like smoke after detonation. For a moment, there was only the low murmur of confusion. Chairs creaking, aides whispering, reporters typing in a frenzy. Then Jasmine Crockett leaned in, clicked her mic on, and spoke. Not with anger, not with panic, but with the deadly calm of someone who had just been tried in public without a trial. "I did not say those words," she began, her voice quiet but magnetic, forcing the room to listen. "That video is not mine. It is not real. It is not even human. It is a synthetic product, an AI-engineered deception crafted to mimic my face, my voice, my breath, but not my truth." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "And I am prepared to prove it." As she gestured behind her, a man in his 40s wearing a navy gray suit and wireframe glasses stood from the second bench. He carried no notes, just a laptop under one arm and a government clearance badge that read DOJ Digital Forensics Division. He nodded once at Jasmine and stepped toward the auxiliary display. Within seconds, he connected his machine. The room's main monitor flickered, then shifted from the frozen thumbnail of the viral clip to a set of spectrographic waveforms, pitch variations, and visual frame breakdowns. Each chart ready to dissect the fraud down to the pixel. The tension twisted tighter. The truth was ready to surface, line by line, frame by frame. But before the first graph could be explained, before a single word of science reached the record, a voice snapped across the room like a whip. "Let's be honest," Karoline Levitt interjected, her mic already live. She didn't look rattled. She looked triumphant. "We're not here to nitpick spectrograms," she said, lifting her chin, eyes scanning the gallery of cameras. "We're here to address what the American people see and hear. We're here to talk about perception." She let the word linger, like it was more sacred than fact. Congresswoman Crockett can argue about what's real or fake all she wants, but voters aren't waiting on lab results. They've already heard her voice. They've already formed their opinions. The words hit harder than any data ever could. It wasn't just a dismissal of evidence. It was a rejection of reality itself. Jasmine hadn't even been allowed to present her defense before her credibility was reframed as irrelevant. The room, which had briefly tilted toward the possibility of truth, snapped back under the weight of Karoline's insinuation. That truth was optional, and belief was king. Jasmine didn't flinch, but her silence became heavier. She was now a defendant in a trial with no judge, no rules, only a jury of millions watching from their phones, scrolling past nuance to find conviction in 15 seconds or less. And in that moment, it became painfully clear. She wasn't just fighting a lie. She was fighting a machine built to outpace the truth, and a system that cheered as it did. And in the wake of silenced truth, Karoline Levitt filled the void with certainty, cold, clinical, and impeccably rehearsed. With a flick of her wrist, she activated the touchscreen embedded in the desk before her. "Let's walk through what this technology actually does," she began, her voice dipped in polished authority, as if she were guiding children through a museum of the future. The overhead monitor changed instantly. The congressional seal faded into a glowing interface of neural maps, waveform grids, and facial recognition models rotating in 3D. She rose slightly in her seat, not enough to look aggressive, just enough to command reverence. This system, she declared, tapping the screen to advance the visuals, is designed to track micro-expressions, vocal stress patterns, and behavioral markers across digital platforms. Its purpose is simple: detect and neutralize misinformation before it metastasizes. She pointed to a heat map of a human face: green, yellow, red zones pulsing with algorithmic confidence. Next came audiographs illustrating pitch elevation, word cadence, and frequency spikes. Whether it's a speech, a live stream, or a podcast, she continued, the AI cross-references tone, language, and context with verified data sources in real time. If deviations are found, the statement is flagged, traced, and categorized. Her words were precise, mechanical, too efficient to be questioned. Yet beneath the technical sheen was something far more sinister: an invisible tribunal of code deciding what truth was allowed to exist. This isn't censorship, she said, as if reading from scripture. This is national security. In an era of viral lies, we need a system that sees past charisma and exposes intent. But before the frost of her final statement could melt, Karoline pressed deeper, her confidence now swelling with the rhythm of a practiced crescendo. In the past 90 days alone, she said, with the cadence of a verdict, our system has identified and verified 200 discrete falsehoods propagated by political candidates on both sides of the aisle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The data would do the shouting for her. With a single swipe, the screen behind her filled with a mosaic of digital profiles, each tied to a timestamp, a statement, and a damning red label: confirmed false. A rolling list of names began to scroll, some known, some obscure, all neatly cataloged as if misinformation were a product SQ. Alongside each one was a heat map of voice stress indicators, facial micro-expressions, and engagement spikes across platforms. The air grew tighter, more sterile, like the oxygen had been replaced by circuitry. She advanced the slide again, revealing a second screen: bar graphs, trend lines, a glowing pie chart breaking down violations by topic: economy, immigration, healthcare, elections. Each case, she continued, was reviewed by credentialed analysts within our oversight framework and corroborated using multi-platform behavioral analytics. There is no guesswork here, only verified deviation from objective reality. Her voice hit that word, objective, like it was sacred. No one interrupted. No one challenged the numbers. The committee leaned in unconsciously. Even the Democratic members, ones who had whispered frustration just moments ago, now watched Karoline with expressions that hovered between hesitation and reluctant intrigue. And Jasmine sat still, eyes fixed, hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles paled to white. Because she knew what the room didn't. Those numbers were not the story. They were the stagecraft, a performance, data without scrutiny, methodologies without transparency. And somewhere buried in that glowing grid of red flags was her name, reduced to a line of code, a digital conviction rendered without trial. The crowd wasn't applauding justice. They were hypnotized by control disguised as clarity, and the woman who had come to expose a lie was now watching it metastasize into gospel. But no matter how carefully a lie is built, it begins to fall the moment it faces undeniable truth. Jasmine Crockett waited only a moment, as if measuring the gravity of what she was about to release. Then she stood. No dramatic movements, no loud declarations, just calm focus. She walked to the center table where the main screen controls were set, the eyes of the room following her like heat-seeking missiles. In her hand, she held the same small silver USB drive that had been sitting in front of her all morning. Quiet, unnoticed, patient. But now it was about to become a weapon. She plugged it in. The large screen behind the committee chair flickered. For a split second, the image was black. Then it lit up with something that made the entire room still. It was the same video Karoline Leavitt had shown earlier, the one where Jasmine appeared to be saying she supported abortion in the 9th month. Same background, same voice, same face. But this time, something was different. Jasmine turned to the room. Her voice was sharp, steady. "This," she said, pointing to the screen, is the video Ms. Levitt shared with the world. Millions have seen it. Many believed it. But what no one saw, what you were not meant to see, is this. She pressed a key. The image zoomed into the lower right corner. There, hidden in near-invisible print, was a faint watermark. Now enlarged, it was impossible to miss. The words were plain. Created using software owned by CentralLogic. Internal version, not for public use. A wave of silence swept the room. Not quiet. Shock. Some members of Congress leaned forward. Reporters stared, wide-eyed, fingers frozen over their keyboards. Aides began whispering to their bosses. The watermark wasn't an opinion. It wasn't a theory. It was proof, technical, undeniable, that the video was a fake and that it had been created using tools never meant to be seen by the public. Jasmine didn't pause. She continued. This program, she said, is not available to everyday users. It's not on the internet. It's not open to researchers. It's used only inside a private company that designs technology to copy people's voices and faces. She moved to the next screen. Now a report appeared showing the exact details of the video file. The time it was created, just 48 hours ago. The location it came from, an internet address in Northern Virginia. Jasmine clicked again, showing a registration record of who owned the network behind that address. One name stood out, bold and clear. NR Strategic Holdings. Nicholas Riccio. She looked up, letting the room connect the final dot. For those unfamiliar, she said calmly, Nicholas Riccio is the husband of Ms. Levitt. You could almost hear the air shift. A soft gasp came from the back rows. A staffer dropped a pen. One congressman muttered something under his breath. A CNN producer leaned into his earpiece. We need this on air, now. Jasmine stood still, centered under the overhead lights. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This wasn't a random attack, she said. This wasn't a stranger on the internet trying to smear me. This was a deliberate effort to create a fake video using private software. Software that isn't supposed to be in the public's hands. And the company behind it is directly tied to the family of the person sitting across from me today. Karoline Levitt didn't speak. Her face was frozen in a half-smile that no longer fit the room. She blinked once, maybe twice, but didn't move. Her hands stayed clasped in front of her, still, tense. The polished poise she carried for the last hour had cracked. Not broken, but it was no longer impenetrable. Jasmine wasn't finished. This isn't just about me, she said, now turning back to the full committee. This is about what happens when technology is used, not to reveal truth, but to replace it. This is what happens when a machine is used to tell the public what to believe, not based on facts, but based on power. She paused. We now know what was used. We know when it was used, and now we know who had access to the tools, who had the motive, who had the connection, and who had everything to gain by making sure this lie went viral before I had a chance to speak. The screen behind her froze on the watermark again, a single line of text that now felt like a confession written in code. This isn't just a political tactic, Jasmine said. This is a digital attack on democracy, and today it has a name, and it has fingerprints. Now the committee members were no longer looking at her with suspicion. Their gazes had changed. They weren't waiting for her to defend herself. They were processing what they had just seen, what they had almost believed. They looked at Karoline, some in silence, some in clear discomfort. A few shifted in their chairs, unsure of what came next, and Jasmine stood in that silence, not as someone pleading for her name back, but as someone who had just taken control of the room without shouting a single word. At the edge of the massive screen, the watermark still glowed, a ghost of the truth they tried to bury, and proof that someone, somewhere, had hoped no one would ever look that closely. They were wrong, and just when it seemed the chamber could not be pushed any further, Jasmine reached for something that didn't glow or blink, something silent and heavy. Her fingers closed around a black folder beneath her notes. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The edges were creased. The surface was worn. But as she slowly stood and held it in her hands, the shift in the room was unmistakable. This wasn't just another document. It felt different, like something no one was supposed to see. The room stilled again. Journalists froze mid-sentence. Caroline shifted slightly for the first time in minutes, her gaze narrowing almost instinctively. Jasmine didn't look at anyone as she opened the folder, only the screen behind her. The contents had already been scanned and prepared. She pressed a single key. The image appeared, the cover page of an internal document from Central Logic. Not a presentation deck, not a press release, a private report. The heading was clear, typed in bold black at the top of the page. Proposal, Deepfake Strategy Testing. Manipulated content for public perception analysis. Even the title had teeth. It wasn't coded or ambiguous. It didn't hide behind soft language or vague terms. It said exactly what it was. A plan to test deepfake videos on real people. A psychological experiment wearing the clothes of innovation. The room reacted immediately. A few senators sat back in their chairs. A staffer near the back covered her mouth. One congressman shook his head slowly, like something sacred had just been violated. Jasmine's voice cut back through the tension. Calm, focused, almost too steady. This document was never supposed to be seen outside the walls of Central Logic, she said. It wasn't meant for journalists. It wasn't meant for the public. It was meant for investors and insiders who wanted to know how far this technology could go before anyone noticed. She tapped again. The screen changed to a page halfway through the report, a section highlighted in yellow, blown up for everyone to see. No spin, no filter. Target demographic. Black progressive women in swing states. The words sat on the screen like poison. No one spoke. No one moved. You could feel it. The quiet recognition that this wasn't an accident. That someone somewhere had drawn a circle around a specific group of Americans and decided, this is who we will deceive. This is where we will strike. This, Jasmine said softly, is not an algorithm gone rogue. This is a plan, a decision, an attack by design. Her voice sharpened, not in volume, but in purpose. She didn't look at the screen anymore. She turned directly toward Karoline, her hands still calmly resting on the edges of the folder, like it was a shield forged in silence. You didn't just come after me, she said. You came after women who look like me, women who fight like me, who speak like me. You didn't try to silence the loudest voice. You tried to confuse the crowd behind it. She stepped forward slightly, not aggressive, not theatrical, just firm, anchored. You didn't aim at me because I'm wrong. You aimed because you knew if the truth I carry is allowed to breathe, then the lie you built will collapse under its own weight. The room still didn't move. Karoline blinked, once. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't speak. Jasmine turned back to the audience. Her tone dropped. Low, heavy. Let's be clear about what this is. This wasn't just about making people believe something false. This was about targeting a group of voters whose voices already fight to be heard. It was about using technology, the same kind we were told would protect elections, to rig emotions instead. She paused. It's not a coincidence that the demographic listed here is the one that consistently swings elections. It's not a coincidence that we are the same voices that get ignored until it's time to be blamed or silenced. She held up the folder. This didn't come from a hacker. It came from inside a boardroom. It came from people with titles and salaries who call this strategy. And the moment that deep fake of me hit the internet, that strategy had a face. Mine. No one interrupted her. No one dared. This isn't about feelings. It's about power. And someone decided the fastest way to keep it was to confuse the people most likely to challenge it. She dropped the folder onto the table, not with force, but with finality. The soft thud was louder than anything said that morning. Then she looked back at Karoline, not with rage, with understanding, the kind that says, I see you now, all of you. You aim for people like me, she said again, quiet but unshakable, because you knew if the truth survived, the lie wouldn't stand a chance. And in that moment, the room knew it too. The fake video had tried to turn her into a puppet. The document tried to reduce her to a number. But Jasmine had just done what the algorithms could not predict. She made herself real, and in doing so, she made their strategy impossible to unsee. And as the final image of the internal memo dimmed behind Jasmine, the words "target demographic, Black progressive women," still burning in the minds of everyone in the chamber, the pressure finally cracked through Karoline Levitt's composure like glass under a storm. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping back against the polished floor with a sharp squeal. Her breath was shallow, but her tone burst out fast and loud, threaded with righteous fury. "Enough!" she barked, grabbing hold of the microphone. "This has gone too far." Her voice trembled just enough to blur the line between anger and panic, but not enough to hide the truth. She had not expected Jasmine to bring this much fire and this much evidence. "You're dragging my family into this?" she said, louder now, her voice filling the chamber. "My husband isn't here. He's not part of this hearing. He doesn't have a seat at this table to defend himself." She swept her hand in front of her as if to shield an invisible man beside her. "You're attacking a private citizen. You're attacking my marriage, just because you can't defend your own policies." Her words spilled over each other like bricks thrown in panic. It wasn't calculated anymore. It was raw. Karoline wasn't testifying now. She was retreating, and everyone in the room could feel it. Some members of the committee leaned back, uncertain whether to intervene. A few glanced toward the chairman. Aides paused mid-note, waiting. Reporters stopped typing for once, watching the shift unfold in real time. It was a classic political move. When facts close in, reframe the fight as personal. Make yourself the victim. Turn the weaponized lie into an emotional shield. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move. She simply waited, calm, still, unreadable. And then when the silence was just long enough to sting, she spoke, soft, steady, and sharp as truth carved in stone. "No one," Jasmine said, her voice so level it felt like a gavel, "is attacking your husband." The words cut through the air like a needle through silk. Her tone was not emotional, not defensive. It was clean, deliberate, unflinching. "This," she said, gesturing gently to the folder on the desk, "is not about your marriage, not about your love, not about your private life. This is about financial ties to public consequences." She took a slow step forward. "It's not personal, Miss Levitt. It's structural, systemic, intentional." Karoline's face twitched, but she said nothing. The room was watching now, truly watching, not for drama, but for clarity, for the line between accusation and revelation. "Your husband may not be in this room," Jasmine continued, "but the company he invested in is. The technology he helped fund is. The weapon they created and deployed is sitting in our faces on this screen." She pointed once more toward the frozen frame behind her, still showing the metadata, the timestamp, the company name. "He doesn't have to be here to defend himself, because this isn't a story about feelings. This is a story about capital, about control." Her voice deepened, each word slower now, like a drum beat counting down to a truth no one wanted to face. "He put money into a system that creates synthetic lies. And those lies were designed, not by accident, but with full intention, to discredit women who look like me, to mislead voters who believe in people like me, to hijack trust in voices like mine." She walked toward the table again and placed her palm flat on the folder. She wasn't angry. She was anchored. Every movement intentional, every syllable weighted. "This isn't about your husband's reputation," she said, looking Karoline directly in the eye. "It's about the effect of his investments, about how power, real power, moves in silence, behind firewalls and spreadsheets. You want to talk about defense? Then let's talk about the people who can't defend themselves because they believed what your husband's company helped create. Let's talk about the voters who were lied to, manipulated, and weaponized without ever knowing it." She paused, not for effect, but because the next line needed space around it. "You think your family's being attacked?" Jasmine said quietly. "Number your family helped build the attack." Gasps moved through the room, not loud, not chaotic, just small, sudden exhalations from people who realized, all at once, that they just watched the temperature of truth shift again. Karoline stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. The redness in her cheeks was no longer performance. It was collapse. Jasmine stepped back from the mic, folded her hands, and let the stillness speak for itself. She didn't need applause. She didn't need volume, because her voice had done what machines could not. Cut through lies without losing humanity. And around her, the silence was not absence. It was reckoning. The room was no longer a hearing chamber. It had transformed, slowly, deliberately, into something else. Something colder. Something more intimate. No one spoke. No one shuffled papers. The overhead lights hummed faintly, but even that seemed to recede into silence. Jasmine Crockett stood perfectly still at the center of it all, not moving, not blinking, her hands resting calmly by her sides as if she were standing not in defense, but in judgment. Every slide had been shown, every receipt laid bare. The video, the metadata, the internal memo, the target demographics, the financial ties, the investment records. And yet, for all the data and all the exposure, there was still one thing missing: the human cost, the betrayal that couldn't be illustrated by heat maps or timetables. And that was what Jasmine was holding now, not in her hands, but in her stillness, in her restraint, in her refusal to perform. She didn't need theatrics. The truth was already afire at their feet, and Karoline Levitt, across from her, was standing far too close to the spark. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean into the microphone. She simply looked calmly, steadily, straight at Karoline. She waited long enough to let the silence stretch tight across the chamber like piano wire. Long enough for the weight of what had already been shown to settle into the eyes of everyone watching, in the room and on the live feeds. Then, with the kind of clarity that only comes when every mask has already fallen, Jasmine spoke. "If you believe in truth," she said, "then why did you invest in the technology built to fake it?" There was no anger in her voice, no tremble. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a challenge. It was a question, plain, devastating, final. It came not from rage, but from control, from the deepest form of power, certainty. And in that moment, it did what nothing else could. It erased the line between political theater and real accountability. Karoline froze. She didn't respond. She couldn't. The words landed like a cold hand pressed to the back of her neck. Unexpected, undeniable. Her mouth twitched as if trying to form something. A deflection, a justification, anything. But nothing came. The room was watching her now. Not Jasmine, not the screen. Her. The walls of protection she had built around herself. The data, the talking points, the carefully rehearsed indignation collapsed in an instant, because this wasn't an attack. It was a mirror. Her breath hitched. She bit her lower lip. Just slightly. Just enough. It was subtle. A flicker, a hairline crack in the marble facade of certainty. Her chin lowered a fraction. Her eyes, once so defiant, dropped not all the way, but enough. Enough for the cameras to catch it, for the silence to record it like evidence. The CNN operator, positioned off-center near the press balcony, saw it. He didn't wait for a cue. He zoomed in slowly, deliberately, past the edge of the table, past the curve of Karoline's shoulder, past the perfectly placed mic. His frame settled, clean and merciless, on the rectangular white placard in front of her. Karoline Levitt, U.S. Press Secretary. No commentary, no voiceover, just the title. And that title, in that moment, said more than she could. Because it wasn't just a name. It wasn't just a role. It was a contradiction. She had sat there all morning, insisting on the power of her office, of protecting the public, of defending democracy, of transparency. She had called the technology noble, necessary, precise. She had praised its ability to cut through lies. She had said it was built to guard the truth. And yet here it was, turned inward, against her, as the very machine she defended was exposed as the very weapon used to lie. The silence didn't just linger, it tightened. You could feel the eyes in the room shift again, but this time not in shock or awe. This time in understanding. Senators exchanged glances, not out of confusion, but recognition. The pieces were no longer scattered. They had been laid in order, in sequence, and now they locked together with the force of inevitability. Because Jasmine hadn't come here to argue, she had come to expose. And the final exposure was not in the files or slides, but in that one unanswered question. If you believe in truth, why did you invest in the technology built to fake it? There was no place to hide from it. The question was too elegant to refute, too direct to escape. It didn't attack Karoline's character. It exposed her choices. It didn't accuse her of creating the lie. It reminded everyone she paid for the machine that made it, that she wasn't a victim. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of the chain. And Jasmine never looked away. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She didn't add another word. Because she didn't need to. The room was holding its breath. Even the press had stopped typing. Their pens had gone still. The only sound was the faint, constant hum of the monitors. And somewhere in the distance, the mechanical click of a still photographer taking one shot, then another. Karoline's face was still pale. She tried to shift in her seat, but even that small movement felt weighted, like she knew too many eyes were watching, like she understood the cost of trying to escape a question that had already settled like ash on her nameplate. Her silence was not power. It was collapse. And in the absence of her answer, something louder was heard. The truth, spoken in full, without permission, without apology. Jasmine Crockett remained standing, still as stone, quiet as consequence. And in that quiet, history adjusted its weight. And then, without a gavel, without a word from Jasmine or Karoline, the chairman of the committee finally broke the silence. He leaned forward, slowly, heavily, as if the sheer weight of what had just unfolded had settled on his back like 100 bricks. The microphone in front of him crackled to life. At this time, he said, his voice strained, dry, shaken in a way no one had heard before, this committee will enter an immediate recess, pending verification of all evidence presented. He looked around the room, not for consensus, but for stability. None met his gaze, not yet. Because the hearing had stopped being a hearing, it had become a battlefield of revelations, a courtroom without a judge, a broadcast with no script left. The moment the chairman spoke those words, immediate recess, the energy in the room snapped like an electrical circuit suddenly rerouted. The air was no longer heavy, it was frantic. Movement erupted. Reporters, who had been frozen in stunned silence just minutes earlier, shot to their feet like alarms had gone off. Phones were already in their hands before their chairs finished scraping backward. Heads down, mouths open, they began speaking over each other in hurried staccato bursts, whispering names, dates, commands. This is going live, now. Get me the file, all of it. Send this upstairs, no edits. Producers ran toward the exits, speaking into earpieces. Field reporters whispered into phones, walking fast but still keeping one eye on the dais in case anything else exploded. You could hear network names ricochet through the air like bullets. CNN, NBC, REUTERS, MSNBC, even Fox. No one was willing to look away, not after that. Jasmine still hadn't moved. She remained standing, hands gently folded, calm in the middle of chaos she didn't create, but revealed. Her screen was dark now, her slides gone, but her impact was everywhere. There were no more attempts to rebut her, no more questions thrown her way. She had become, in a single unspoken turn, unquestionable, not just because of the documents, not just because of the metadata, but because she never flinched. And in a world where perception ruled, that alone was power. And then the digital world responded. In a production trailer parked 4 blocks away, the CNN social media director shouted from behind his monitor. Her follower count just jumped 78,000 in under 10 minutes. On a separate screen, the live comment feed was spinning faster than the interns could read. Phrases repeated in all caps. Jasmine just ended her. This is history. I'm switching parties. By the hour's end, Jasmine's X account, the one that had been targeted by smear campaigns and buried in manipulated search results, had gained over 400,000 new followers. verified, organic, no ads, no bots, just impact. Real, live Americans, watching, stunned, rewiring their faith in real time. Inside the chamber, Caroline had sat back down, but not like before. She no longer filled her chair. She occupied it, quiet, smaller. Aides surrounded her, whispering, shielding her with bodies but not with credibility. No one looked at her the same way. The woman who had walked into that room with the confidence of someone bulletproof now sat like someone who'd heard the click too late. Meanwhile, producers inside MSNBC's New York studio moved with military precision. One barked, "Clip the question, just the question." Another added, "Overlay it with the shot of Caroline's face." No reaction commentary. Let it speak for itself. The edit took 2 minutes. The post took 2 seconds. Within 5 minutes, the 13-second clip of Jasmine's calm, surgical question, "If you believe in truth, why did you invest in the technology built to fake it?" had been viewed over 2 million times, and it was only growing. Outside the Capitol, crowds were already forming. Tourists stopped walking. Protesters turned their signs toward the building. Some wore headphones, watching the feed on their phones. Others stared at their screens in complete silence. One woman mouthed Jasmine's final words as if praying them. The power of the moment had left the room. It had cracked through glass and pixel. It had escaped into the bloodstream of the nation. But back inside the high-ceiling chamber, still half-frozen in disbelief, the aftermath of the hearing suspension played out like the slow pull of a curtain. Staffers moved quickly, collecting papers, but eyes kept darting to Jasmine, as if afraid that at any moment she might drop another bomb or vanish like a ghost that only appears when history needs reminding. But Jasmine did neither. She simply gathered her folder, the same black folder that had just flipped the balance of an entire investigation, and closed it quietly. It wasn't over, but something had ended. Not the hearing, not the investigation, but the illusion. The illusion that power could hide behind distance, that lies built on code could not be traced, that you could aim at a voice like Jasmine's and expect silence in return. And no one understood that better than the people scrambling now. Media, staffers, analysts, operatives, racing to figure out what they had just witnessed and what they would tell the world it meant. But for the people watching, not the politicians, not the strategists, not the talking heads, but the citizens sitting at home, eyes locked on a screen, mouths half open, something simpler had taken root. They saw a woman stand up with nothing but a folder and a flash drive and unravel the myth that truth was helpless. And when the chairman finally stood again, his voice once more taking control of the room, it was with no pomp, no ceremony, just gravity. "This committee will reconvene," he said, "once we've reviewed and authenticated all submitted evidence. Until then, this hearing stands in recess." He didn't need to say more. Everyone in the room, and every viewer across the country, already understood. The truth had spoken, and no matter how many algorithms had tried to erase it, it was still here, still breathing, still undeniable. And as the cameras finally dimmed inside the hearing room and the heavy doors closed behind the last stunned witness, the ripple effect began, not in whispers, but in numbers. Far from Capitol Hill, in glass towers filled with glowing monitors and trading screens, the storm hit faster than most realized. CentralLogic's stock, once the darling of the tech elite, once praised as the future of political security and behavioral analytics, opened at $92.17 per share. By noon, it was $81.06. By 2 p.m., it was in freefall. 17%. Gone. Billions evaporated with the speed of a mouse click. Analysts on Bloomberg scrambled to find explanations mid-broadcast. Some tried to downplay it. "Market overreaction," they said. Others were more candid. "This isn't a sell-off, it's a reckoning." Investors panicked. Automated trading systems triggered in cascades. Shareholders demanded emergency board meetings. Screens across the financial sector turned red, like a blood pressure monitor exploding under stress. There was no virus, no global collapse, no war. Just one hearing, just one woman, just one truth the market wasn't ready for. Inside the nerve centers of CentralLogic itself, the tension turned to chaos. Internal Slack channels were shut down. Company-wide meetings were pulled onto encrypted servers. Staff whispered the word testimony like a curse. Legal teams huddled in corners. Public relations scrambled to craft statements that could soften the blow. But the damage had already bled into the walls. Every employee now knew what the outside world was watching. Their brand wasn't just bleeding, it was radioactive. No one could say it out loud, but they all felt it. The company had built its reputation on trust, and Jasmine Crockett had just shattered that foundation with 6 words. Why invest in the technology to fake truth? While the market reeled, the media did what it does best: fracture. 2 realities emerged from the same footage. Fox News launched into counterattack before the hearing had even been gavelled out. Primetime anchors with polished suits and strained smiles dismissed the documents as unverified leaks, calling the deepfake evidence interesting but inconclusive. They painted Jasmine as theatrical, a gifted performer, they said, but light on substance. Tucker Carlson's substitute host ran a full segment titled, "The Left's Deepfake Drama, Another Desperate Smear." They questioned her motives. They questioned her timing. They showed slow-motion clips of her final statement, stripping it of tone and context, turning her poised composure into something cold, almost robotic. "If you remove the emotion," one commentator said, "you'll see she never actually proved that Levitt ordered the video. This was all circumstantial." Another guest chimed in, "She went after a husband, a private citizen. That tells you everything." But outside the Fox bubble, the story unfolded very differently. On MSNBC, banners read like headlines from a film script. "The first political AI reckoning in American history. Crockett versus the machine. Deepfake collapse when truth fights back." Rachel Maddow opened her segment without preamble. "Tonight, we witnessed not just the unraveling of a political scandal, we witnessed a turning point in the story of democracy itself." She replayed the clip of Jasmine's question in full, no commentary, no interruption, then let the screen fade to black for 3 full seconds of silence. "That," she said, "was the sound of a lie dying." Editorials erupted across digital outlets. The Atlantic ran a headline that read, "The day tech blinked first." Rolling Stone, "Central logic burned, but Jasmine Crockett lit the match." TechCrunch, "AI has a morality problem. Today it faced its first real trial." The story flooded every timeline, every homepage, and through it all, Jasmine said nothing. She posted no victory. She gave no interview. She disappeared into silence, and her silence spoke louder than any spin. Yet despite the headlines and hashtags, Jasmine wasn't celebrating, because she knew what others were only beginning to realize: that exposing a system doesn't end it. The fall of a stock doesn't dismantle the architecture behind it. And the media, even when it applauds you, will move on. But the damage done to trust, to community, to her identity, that would linger. The people who had believed the fake video still existed. The people who had threatened her inbox, her staff, her family, they didn't just vanish. For every viewer who saw the truth, there were 5 who saw a gotcha clip stripped of context and twisted into another culture war. That was the part no headline could fix. She had stood up, exposed a machine designed to erase her, and forced the world to see it. But justice was slow, painfully slow. And truth, no matter how sharp, rarely traveled as fast as lies crafted by code. So when the anchors praised her, she stayed quiet. When the markets crashed, she didn't smile. And when the world trended her name, she didn't post a word. Because she understood what so many did not. This wasn't her moment to win. It was the system's moment to be seen losing. And that was just the beginning. And just as the headlines cooled and the hashtags began to fade, the second wave arrived, not in the form of trending clips or cable news debate, but in the unblinking language of subpoenas and sealed memos. The U.S. Department of Justice issued a brief but devastating press release at 7:03 a.m. the following Monday. A federal inquiry has been opened into the financial ties between Central Logic and various current and former government officials. The scope includes undisclosed investments, procurement contracts, and political communications related to synthetic media technologies. 17 words, no names, no party lines. But the message underneath was clear. The machine was no longer invisible. By 9 a.m., white vans with blacked-out windows were seen pulling into the Northern Virginia headquarters of Central Logic. At the same time, two mid-level aides at the Office of Digital Security were placed on administrative leave. By noon, three congressional staffers retained legal counsel, and within 24 hours, the term AI laundering began trending, referring to the funneling of taxpayer-funded research grants through semi-private AI firms, some of which were found to share board members with political appointees. For the first time in years, the words conflict of interest didn't feel theoretical. They felt like ash. What Jasmine had cracked open wasn't just about a faked video. It was about something much older, much darker, the way power hides itself behind innovation, and the way innovation, unchecked, becomes a tool of engineered deceit. She had testified with a folder and a question. Now federal agents were comparing internal communications, mapping out shell corporations, and connecting campaign donations to defense tech trials. And still, Jasmine had said nothing more. Until now. The studio lights in D.C. were lower than usual, softened for the tone of the interview. The anchor across from her had covered wars, elections, and 2 impeachments. But even she looked hesitant when she asked the final question. Congresswoman Crockett, after all of this, after the evidence, the hearing, the investigations, what lessons should the American people take from what you uncovered? Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She sat still, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, her posture strong but not rigid. Her face wasn't triumphant. It wasn't even proud. It was solemn, tired, focused. And then she spoke. We can forgive mistakes, she said quietly. We've all made them. I've made them. The public has a remarkable capacity to forgive when there's accountability. But what we cannot forgive, what we should never normalize, is the industrialization of deception, the mass production of lies, the cloning of falsehoods through technology built not to protect people, but to manipulate them. She looked up, straight into the camera. What we're dealing with now is not just fake news, it's fake people, fake voices, fake realities, sold to us with clean logos and buzzwords, funded by billion-dollar firms with government contracts and patriotic slogans. But underneath it, it's poison, digitized, sanitized, weaponized. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We can forgive human error, Jasmine continued, her tone sharpening like a blade. But we cannot forgive the manufacturing of lies, on purpose, for profit, dressed up as progress. The anchor didn't speak. The control room didn't cut away. The silence after her words felt heavier than applause, because everyone watching knew what she was saying. This wasn't a scandal. It was a warning, and it had come too close to being missed. Meanwhile, across social platforms, her quote appeared within minutes. Not as a meme, not as a clip, but as a sentence. Clean, chilling, unshakable. We can forgive mistakes, but we cannot forgive the mass production of lies by design. It trended not because it was catchy, but because it was true, and no one knew how to unhear it. And though the networks had already clipped her words, though the sentence had begun to echo through feeds and headlines, we can forgive mistakes, but we cannot forgive the mass production of lies by design. Jasmine Crockett herself did not celebrate. She did not post. She did not respond. Because she understood what the moment demanded was not noise, it was reflection. She left the studio quietly that night, no entourage, no victory lap. Just her and the silence that always follows after you've spoken something that can't be taken back. The kind of silence that follows only after you've said something so clear, so exact, that it stops even the liars in their tracks. The kind of silence that feels like standing in the eye of a storm and realizing the storm is made of people. And as the sun set over Washington and the Potomac darkened beneath the amber streetlights, Jasmine walked alone, coat wrapped tight, the city behind her flashing with all the images she no longer controlled. Her face, her voice, her question, her truth. All of it now bouncing around satellites and screens, dissected by strangers, defended by some, distorted by others. But none of that was the lesson. That would come later. That would come in the quiet, because what no camera ever captured, what no breaking news graphic ever printed, was the cost of being right, the loneliness, the exhaustion, the unspoken knowledge that even when the system breaks in front of you, it doesn't collapse. It adapts. It survives. It shifts the floor beneath your feet and waits for you to slip. And Jasmine had felt that long before she stood in that hearing room. She had known it in law school when she spoke up and watched professors raise their eyebrows just slightly higher than when her white classmates spoke. She had known it on the campaign trail when she was told not to sound too angry, even while defending people who had lost their homes, their health care, their parents. She had known it when the deepfake first surfaced, before the forensic reports, before the watermark, when people she knew personally shared the clip without question. She had always known that being right doesn't protect you. It paints a target on your back. That was the first lesson. Truth is not a shield. It is a flare. You light it, and everything that feeds on darkness sees you. And still, Jasmine lit it. Not because she believed the system would thank her for it, but because if she didn't, she would have to live with the rot, with the silence, with the knowledge that a tool built to erase her identity, her record, her voice, had nearly succeeded. So when the investigation began, when subpoenas were issued, when committee chairs scrambled to revise talking points, when tech executives deleted tweets and braced for legal fallout, Jasmine remained still, not because she felt satisfied, but because she knew how short the memory of justice could be. She had no illusions. There would be more hearings, more manufactured clips, more software dressed in patriotism and sold as security. Someone somewhere was already building the next version of the lie. Faster, smarter, harder to detect. So the lesson couldn't just be legal, it had to be human. And when a young journalist asked her a week later, off camera, off the record, what she had learned, she didn't reach for policy or rhetoric. She said something no one expected. People don't need to be protected from lies, she said. They need to be reminded that they still matter in a world trying to digitize their doubt. Because that's what the deepfake didn't just try to do to her. It tried to reduce her to a version, a clip, a mouth saying things she never said, a headline stripped of history, a figure that could be copy-pasted, clipped, distorted. That's what they were trying to do to everyone. Not just lie about people, but replace them. That was the second lesson. This wasn't about erasing her. It was about erasing authenticity, replacing the imperfect, the human, the layered and complicated truth of real people with programmed illusions that could be controlled. Clean, predictable, disposable, and that's what made her decision to speak up, as herself, so dangerous. Because in a system built to erase nuance, being unapologetically real is revolutionary. She didn't cry on the stand. She didn't yell. She didn't crack. She refused to be distorted. She forced the world to deal with her as she is. And that resistance, quiet, powerful, unblinking, became something larger than the scandal. It became a mirror that revealed just how many people had accepted the fake because it was easier than facing the uncomfortable, defiant truth of someone who refused to break. That was the third lesson. People don't want lies, they want certainty. And if the lie feels more certain than the truth, they'll choose it every time. Jasmine's strength was not in her argument. It was in her refusal to offer comfort. She didn't make it easy. She didn't offer an escape hatch. She made the nation sit in its discomfort. And in doing so, she made people feel again. Feel distrust. Feel violated. Feel responsible. Because what good is exposing a lie if people walk away thinking it was someone else's problem? So she didn't let them. In her interviews, she didn't shift blame. She didn't speak in third person. She didn't distance herself from the fear. She named it. She stood next to it. She said, "This was done to me, but it could have been you, your mother, your daughter, your voice, your truth." She made the danger personal, and because of that, the truth became personal too. That was the final lesson. We don't fight to be heard because we believe we'll win. We fight to remind others that they're not alone, that their silence is not inevitable, that someone already broke the wall, and they can walk through it. And Jasmine Crockett, standing beneath the weight of a system that tried to digitize her out of existence, had done exactly that. She didn't fix the machine, but she cracked it. She didn't stop the technology, but she stopped its invisibility. And in a world where injustice thrives on invisibility, that was everything. That was human. That was the lesson. And while the moral wound still pulsed through the nation's conscience like a fresh scar, Jasmine knew one thing more dangerous than the lie that nearly erased her: silence in its aftermath. The investigation had begun. The headlines had flared and cooled. The public was watching, but watching wasn't enough, because lies don't die on exposure. They evolve in neglect. And Jasmine had seen enough, survived enough, to know that the story couldn't end with her vindication. It had to begin with collective awakening. So she returned one last time, not to testify, but to ignite. The Capitol hearing room looked different now. Cameras had multiplied. Reporters leaned forward, not with smug detachment, but with something new: unease. A sense that history was not behind them, but waiting just ahead, knife in hand. Jasmine stood not behind a desk, but before it. Not as a witness, not as a victim, but as a warning. She didn't bring a USB stick. She brought the truth. And this time, she didn't whisper it. She didn't thread it gently between metaphors. She brought it raw. "I came here today not because I was invited," she said, "but because the lie came for me. And now it's coming for all of you." The room stilled. "Some of you think this ends with an indictment," she continued. "That exposure alone is justice. But I need you to understand something. This technology, this silent machine of manipulation, it doesn't care who you vote for. It doesn't care what God you pray to. It doesn't even care about truth. It only cares about what people believe. And belief, my friends, has become programmable." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Jasmine didn't pause. "They used it on me because I was loud, because I was inconvenient, because I was a black woman who didn't fold when told to behave. But don't think that makes me the only target. Don't think for a second you are safe just because today the spotlight isn't on you." Her hand lifted, firm and open. "Tomorrow it will be your words they fake. Your daughter's face on a video she never made. Your father's voice saying something he never said." She stepped forward. "And when that happens, you won't need a hero." She pointed, calm, surgical. "You'll need each other." Silence. And then her voice dropped low, not quiet, deadly. "This is not about regulation. This is about resistance. This is about a public that no longer accepts digital warfare as background noise. This is about a nation that doesn't outsource its reality to machines." She looked into every lens. "If they can fabricate truth, then truth becomes our responsibility, not mine. Not just the journalists, but yours." Her breath caught, not in weakness, but in conviction. "Fact check what you share. Question what you watch. Demand transparency from every official, every company, every voice with power." She leaned in, not toward the mic, but toward the moment. "This is your call to action, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as witnesses to what just happened, as citizens who now know what can be done in your name, with your data, and against your will." Her final words didn't come as a crescendo. They came like a verdict. "No one will save democracy for us. We either protect it together or we watch it be rewritten, one synthetic lie at a time." And then she stepped back. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to, because silence, when pregnant with truth, thunders louder than applause. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.